Greetings and welcome to our next episode of Ghost Stories in Washington, episode 7. Starting off with our first story, which is entitled Man in the Closet, followed by Haunting License, followed by a haunting melody, and Ghost in the Machine. So, starting off with our first short story, Man in the Closet, one of the strangest haunted houses tales I've ever come across, occurred in Washington. Richland, in the south central part of the state, was for a time home to a most amazing apparition. Not only was his appearance unusual, but his actions were too. The first interaction between a family member and the ghost was not even recognized as a paranormal encounter for a full year after it happened. The family daughter, who was only 3 years old at the time, was suddenly able to do astonishing mathematical calculations. When the parents asked the little girl how she had learned to do this, the child informed them that the man who comes out from my closet taught me. The parents assumed that she was imagining things and did not pursue the subject any further. They might never have thought of the incident again if it had not been for the fact that the woman of the house actually saw the ghost. The specter was a tall man wearing a Western style outfit. His first manifestation terrified the woman. One night she simply woke up to find a strange man standing beside her bed. Moments later, the ghost left the woman's room and headed down the hallway to her children's bedrooms. It was only her concern for the children's safety that forced the terrified woman to follow. On the edge of panic, she followed the apparition as it entered her daughter's bedroom. Steadying herself to confront the man, she switched on the light in the child's room. There was no one in the room but her preschool-aged daughter. The next ghost incident was stranger still. Once again, the woman was awakened in the night. By this time, by the sound of the dresser in the bedroom being shaken. As soon as she opened her eyes, she knew that the ghost was in her room again. The apparition, however, was only visible from the waist down. From then on, the family saw the phantom more and more often, usually in the peripheral vision in their eyes. In an attempt to discover who the ghost might have been, the couple began to research the history of their house and the land on which it was situated. When they didn't turn up any clues, they wondered if the ghost had somehow been associated with one of their pieces of antique furniture. Although the husband once invited the ghost to stay in their home, the otherworldly presence eventually proved too much for the wife to bear. The spirit would taunt her by imitating her children's voices and calling, "Mommy, Mommy, Mommy." One day, the pressure of living with this mocking presence simply became too much for her. The woman screamed at the unwanted visitor, demanding that he leave. Either the ghost didn't want to stay where he wasn't wanted, or he was ready to leave anyway, for no one in the family has seen or heard him since. In our second of 4 short stories, the next one is Haunting License. Many of Washington's ghosts make their home in Officers Row in Fort Vancouver. One of the buildings, now a private home, was a most distant presence. In 1997, Mary, the occupant of the house, told reporters that she had known almost from the beginning that her home was haunted. In addition to the different, distinct feelings of an unseen presence, lights and clocks around the place seemed to work on their own schedule, their own or a ghost's. That is, the next sign Mary received was a lingering whiff of perfume from an invisible source. Then finally she actually saw the apparition, a hazy female shape. The ghost's features were defined enough that Mary knew she was being stared at. After a while, the image simply faded. Since that first manifestation, the ghostly woman has reappeared occasionally. But even when she doesn't see the ghost, Mary knows the spirit is still around. When she comes home from being away for several hours, she will find lights burning that had been carefully turned off before she left. And in our next story, a haunting melody. Just outside Seattle, an entire housing project in Duwamish Bend project was haunted by a phantom crooner. Beginning in 1949, the year the homes were built, occupants could hear wailing, but were never able to track down its source. The unnerving cries continued for several years, and at some point began being accompanied by ghostly singing. Witnesses described a deep, rich voice, belting out such popular tunes of the day as Fools Rush In, Blue Moon, and of course, Ghost Riders in the Sky. Despite several energetic efforts to track down the source of the singing and to discover who the mysterious minstrel might have been, the strange performances remained in conundrum until they simply ceased during the mid-1950s. And then for our final story for this segment, Ghost in the Machine. The following bizarre events took place in Washington, but the information came to me from England. Wow, that was certainly a convoluted route. At least the tale ended up where it belongs, in Ghost Stories of Washington. The people involved did not want to be identified, nor would they reveal specifically where their intriguing encounter took place. Fortunately for our purposes, neither omission distracts from this puzzling ghost story. We do know that these incidents took place in a rural area of Washington, and that the people involved had just become parents for the first time. The year was 1991. Peter and Sue, these names are pseudonyms, and their newborn son Kyle were living in a basement apartment in Sue's parents' home. All was going well until the cold and damp winter set in. Increasingly, they all felt that the downstairs suite was too cold for an infant's sleeping quarters. The couple made arrangements for Sue's parents so that Kyle could sleep upstairs, but in order to avoid disturbing the older couple, they bought a baby monitor. After setting up one monitor besides Kyle's cradle and one by their bed, Sue and Peter felt much more comfortable. Their little son would be warm, and they would hear him if he needed attention during his rest. The baby slept soundly through the next few nights. Sue and Peter were therefore somewhat startled when about a week later they were awakened by the distant sound of a baby crying. Sue raced upstairs, hoping to reach her son before he disturbed her parents. As it turned out, she needed not have worried. Her parents were still wide awake, sitting up watching television, and Kyle was enjoying a deep, silent sleep. After checking on the child and having a quick conversation with her parents, Sue went back downstairs thinking she must have only dreamed about Kyle crying. What she found when she rejoined Peter in the bedroom did nothing to support that theory. Peter was up in bed, looking worried, Beside him on the nightstand, the monitor blared with the sounds of a baby crying its heart out. Sue tried, as best as she was able, to assure her husband that their son was fine and was not making any noise at all. If this unsettling incident had occurred in an apartment building in a crowded city, the couple might have been able to convince themselves that their monitor was picking up another frequency. But they were deep in the country. The closest neighbor was several miles away and in their late 60s, so that explanation did not hold up to scrutiny. The strange cries returned more than a dozen times over the next few months. The pattern was always the same. Sue and Peter would be awakened in the middle of the night by anguished sounds transmitted over the baby monitor. And not just any sound, the distinct sound of an infant crying. They would rush upstairs only to find their child fast asleep. In 1992, the little family moved out of their own place to a home 13 miles south of Sue's parents' home. They were looking forward to leaving the enigma behind. Unfortunately, during their first night in their new home, they were awakened by the familiar phantom cries. One afternoon, when Kyle was about 18 months old, Sue and a friend were in the backyard doing a bit of gardening. While the baby had his afternoon nap before leaving the house, Sue turned on the monitor beside the little boy's crib and clipped the receiver to her belt so she would hear the baby when he woke up. As the two women worked in the yard, the monitor began to transmit some disturbing signals. Sue and her friends stared at one another in horror as they heard a strange woman's voice. This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. As the voice spoke the last line of the well-loved children's game, and this little piggy went wee, 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 all the way home. Sue's face drained of color. In the background, she could clearly hear her son's distinctive giggle. Both women ran for the house and made their way to Kyle's bedroom. He was lying on his bed, sound asleep. Sue said, "The room was freezing cold, so I went to shut his window and pulled up his blankets. As he turned in his bed and tucked his thumb in his mouth, Kyle muttered one word in his sleep. Piggy." That was the last straw as far as Sue was concerned. She had enough of the haunted baby monitor. She disconnected the transceiver by Kyle's bed, unclipped the receiver from her belt, and put the whole unit in the backyard storage shed. Several months later, Peter and Sue decided to hold a garage sale to dispose of many items from Kyle's infancy that they no longer used. The baby monitor was one of the first items they ticketed for sale for the sale table. Because such devices, when they work properly, are undeniably handy for young parents, the monitor sold quickly. Twice. Unfortunately, both times the gadget was sold, the people who had purchased it brought it back almost immediately, saying only that it didn't work right. In desperation, Kyle's parents finally took the monitor outside and pounded it to bits with a hammer. That they felt was the only way it could be sure they were finally rid of the possessed baby monitor. Spooky tale, huh? So hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Ghost Stories of Washington, Haunted Houses, Man in the Closet, Haunting License, A Haunting Melody, and Ghost in the Machine. How intriguing, huh? Take care, and we will see you in the next episode of Washington Ghost Stories, which will start out with Century Old Haunting. Take care, and we'll see you in the next stream. Bye for now.